to meet into, there we go. So we're going to be talking about homes today. The homeowners manage energy savings. The Homes Act has been around for a number of years, and I want to apologize for my voice up front because I do have a cold, but hopefully that won't be too distracting. The IRA does provide $4.3 billion in formula funds through the State Energy Office for homes rebates, and these are rebates to upgrade America's homes. They provide these direct rebates through both a measured approach and a modeled approach. And these are two different pathways that I'll explain in this presentation today. Another thing to note about homes, it's fuel neutral. It's paired with HERA, the Electrification rebate program, which is $4.5 billion as well. But that is not fuel neutral. That's very focused on electrification, and we'll be talking about those in other webinars. The rebates are at least doubled for low and moderate income families, and LMI in the homes rebate program is up to 80% of area median income. And that's area median income by the HUD definition. The other thing to note in all cases when while it could be at least doubled for low and moderate income, it is still capped at 80% of the overall project cost. So that cap stays in place for LMI families. For market rate families, it is 50% of the overall project cost. This includes both single and multifamily buildings, and I'll talk a little bit about those differences as well. And there is no requirement for owner occupied in the legislation. This has been in the past. For example, it was part of 25C. It has been in earlier versions of the Homes Act. Owner occupied was required, but it is not required in the statute. So there's 6 elements required in a state energy plan. I'm primarily going to be focusing on the first 2. So a state energy office needs to provide to DOE according to the statute how or if the state's going to implement the model performance rebate, how the state will implement the measured performance rebate, and how the state will value savings based on time, location, or greenhouse gas emissions. I'll touch on that as well. And then these last 3 will be covered by other webinars, but a plan for quality monitoring to ensure that each home energy efficiency retrofit for which a state is provided is documented in a certificate, how the state will provide contractors with a $200 rebate for upgrading a home in disadvantaged communities, and then how the state is going to ensure that the home's rebate doesn't overlap with another federal grant or rebate. So in this case, the ones to be thinking about would be the electrification rebate or the weatherization. The homes rebates have 2 main pathways: modeled and measured. And I'll go through each one separately, but overall, the modeled is how you project. Projects must achieve modeled energy savings of at least 20%, and there's a different credit for 20% and 35%, and then they can be doubled for low and moderate income families. Whereas the measured approach is really more focused on an aggregated approach, where over a portfolio of homes would achieve at least 15%, and then the rebate is based per kilowatt hour that is saved after that 15%. Again, those are also at least doubled for low and moderate income families, but again, there still is the cap of 50% for market rate and 80% for LMI of the overall project. So now on modeled homes, projects are using the modeled energy savings pathway must be calibrated to historical energy usage for a home. And so the historical energy of usage for a home consistent with BPI 2400. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but let's just walk through the different options here. So a home saves between 20 and 34% for an individual single family home. A market rate customer would get $2,000 or 50% of the project cost, whichever is less. And if they're a lower moderate income homeowner, again, 80% of area median income, they would get $4,000 or 80% of the project cost, whichever is less. that same market rate customer saves 35% or more, 40, 50%, that then they would get $4,000 or 50% of the project cost. And then again, doubled at $8,000 or 80% of the project cost for an LMI customer. And then for multifamily, this is per dwelling unit, and LMI customers are at least 50% of that multifamily building is as qualifies it as LMI. And then everything I said before about per dwelling unit. And I'm going to go a little bit in to multifamily more in a couple slides. So when we talk about modeled energy savings and historical data, we talk about BPI 2400. So what is BPI 2400? And it is in statute. That is the Building Performance Institute's ANSI standard, which is the standard practice for standardized qualification of whole house energy savings predictions by calibration of energy use. It's lovely title, and it is actually being reviewed to be updated as well. But basically what it does is it was an industry standard for truing up a home, the home's energy consumption to actual historical usage of that home. And why is that important? It's important because let's say you have a portfolio of homes and each home is identical. It's the same size, but we all know that some of them could use more or less energy depending on things that perhaps aren't even visible to the contractor when they're there. It has to do with insulation in the walls. The model that the contractor is going to be using is going to model what is in the house, and then to establish a baseline that you're going to be setting that 20%, 30%, 35% savings projection on. So in order to, it's a big difference if that home saves 4,000 kilowatt hours in a year, or 6,000 kilowatt hours in a year, or uses, 4,000 or 6,000. Where that home starts at is very different. And there's no such thing as an average 4-bedroom 1950s house, because so many things happen over that course of time. So being able to actually true up the individual house to say, all right, here's what we know about the house. Here's all the everything that we can visibly see in the house to model the house. And we're going to true it up to the historical energy use of that home to make sure that it's around accurate. Now, this has been one of the challenges to modeling in the past, when it's not trued up to historical energy data, that you could end up with over predictions. This isn't to say that anything will be exact. It's a model. Models aren't exact in that by definition. But what it does is it is able to make the model at least more close to exact for that home. And so that the 4,000 kilowatt hour per year house and the 6,000 per kilowatt hour a year house are set as separate, different baselines, so that what their energy measures that they take will have different projections. So that is the reason for that and why it's so important that we have the truing up to historical energy use. And by the way, before I go too far, when I talk about historical energy use, that can also be bills. I mean, these are known utility bills, access to utility bills. Obviously, it's easier if it's done digitally. And I will talk a little bit more about access to utility data in a minute too. The measured pathway. So the measured approach, as defined in the legislation, is a measured energy savings pathway. Would use an open source advanced measurement and verification software as approved by DOE to determine and document monthly and hourly, if available, whether normalized, home energy use, both before and after home energy efficiency retrofits. Now, the key issue here is just being able to establish a baseline and be able to project forward. So you've got, and the reason why there is it starts at a lower amount is because it's more closer to accurate, because it's based on actual energy consumption. So you would take a portfolio of homes and establish the baseline. And actually, I'm going to walk through the math because this is really just a math problem. But before I walk through the math, I want to talk a little bit about I'm going to going to go backwards, go forward and backwards. So here's the math. The math for a measured approach is relatively simple. It's just an equation. So you take the average energy use of so I'm just giving an example of a state. So look at the bottom box that I have on the screen. This is just, I'm just guessing a state. It's state unicorn. It's not a real state. The average kilowatt hour use of a home in state unicorn is 5,000 kilowatt hours. That's the average of energy use. The average annual energy use of a home that is in the same house, their gas use, 200 therms, and one therm equals 29.3 kilowatt hours. Math, 5860. So then we have an annual average of it's 10,860 kilowatt hour equivalent. So that's the math. The incentive rate, therefore, in state unicorn is $2,000 for a market rate customer divided by 10,860 equals 0.18 cents. So it's 18 cents. 18 cents a kilowatt hour is the incentive for that state. That's their average. That's based on their average consumption. And if they're an LMI customer, it's 37 cents. So if you're an aggregator, so if you're an aggregator and it saves 15% of your portfolio, you get a big portfolio of homes, and that portfolio, some of them are saving more, some of them aren't. After all these retrofits you've done, different kinds of retrofits, then you're going to be paid based on that kilowatt hour, per kilowatt hour savings. Now, what is an aggregator? Well, the statute is silent on this point. It doesn't actually define it. However, there is underlying legislation, and I will point you to a bill that I worked a long time on, but so it should not go in the dustbins of history. 1768, which was the original Hope for Homes legislation, or the Hope for Homes legislation in the last Congress. This is the bill that Senator Manchin's team turned into what became the budget reconciliation. The legislation that we have been referring to, the Inflation Reduction Act. So, and because the Inflation Reduction Act was budget reconciliation, the almost 80-page 1768 became about 15 to 17 pages. So, so there's a lot of ground to cover that was left on the cutting room floor. What is an aggregator? An aggregator, according to 1768, is a gas utility, an electric utility, a commercial, nonprofit, or government entity that may receive rebates provided under a state program for one or more portfolios consisting of one or more energy efficiency retrofits. So it's pretty general, but that is what essentially an aggregator is. Will everyone want to be an aggregator? Maybe, but can they be? Probably not. Why? Because they have to actually also provide something that there are aggregators across the country that exist right now. They do this all the time, and they have to provide something called a fractional savings uncertainty, which is the uncertainty potential of how uncertain they're going to be about their prediction, right? About the portfolio's energy savings. How good are they at doing this? And so an aggregator, an established aggregator, knows how to do this. And how I explained it to legislative staff what a fractional savings uncertainty was I would talk about polling. When you're looking at candidates that are running for office, and you look at all the different polls, they always have that plus or minus. They're polling at these levels, and then there's the plus or minus 4%, plus or minus 5%. It tells you how accurate that poll probably is, that plus or minus. Well, that's the same thing. It's that how accurate they're going to be plus or minus to being able to achieve the savings that they're saying they're going to achieve. The payments are, again, in 1768, we're after 12 to 13 months of weather normalized data. The assumption would be, like with many energy programs across the country, federal programs, this is how the federal ESCO market works, they utilize financing. There's financing upfront that provides those rebates. And the rebates that are going to be provided aren't exactly going to be 2,000, 4,000, because actually it's not exactly 20%, 35%. It's based on that, on a prediction and energy measures and what that aggregator is providing. The main thing that the public policymaker wants to know is if I'm paying it for it, it's an actual energy, it's an actual kilowatt hour saved. That is the guarantee that the aggregator is providing, and they're taking on the risk, and then they're providing whatever incentives, demand response incentives, measured upgrades, with all the things that they can do to make sure that they get to those savings. And of course, they need to use open source advanced M&V, and utilities are pretty familiar with that. So what does that mean? When I say early pathway, I mean, you may have access to utility data in your state, you may not. It may be coming, it may not. You may have programs that are working great, maybe they're not. So the lesson from the measured approach is look at the programs that you have, look at their actual results, see what they're actually saving, not what they're predicting saving, but they're actually saving, and incentivize what works. And then, the bonus would be to include greenhouse gas and time and location incentives, which I'm going to talk about next. I have a couple of minutes. I already showed you this. So how demand response, carbon reduction opportunities can enhance modeled and measured approaches. So, so how's that? So you can actually take one of the elements of your, remember those 6 things that the state has to provide to DOE, is how you're going to incorporate greenhouse gas reductions, how you're going to incorporate time and location. How are those going to be incorporated in your plan? Well, they can be incorporated directly into your plan, or at least one would hope. Again, there's going to be guidelines coming from DOE, but this is an opportunity for us to discuss. So the vision for this was that you can align your incentives with greenhouse gas and grid values. Let's make sure that the program is providing for your greenhouse gas goals, your carbon reduction goals, if your state has them, and how your grid works. And one of the key elements and one of the spirits of the Homes Act is that it allows states to tailor it to their specific state, because every state has their own utility structures, their own contractor levels, their different weather, different building stock. So align it accordingly. Encourage programs to focus on projects that provide the most grid value. So being able to provide additional value where there is additional value. We all know that a kilowatt hour, not all kilowatt hours are created equal. They don't have the same value to the utility. They don't have the same value to the customer. They don't have the same value to the climate. So be able to value your kilowatt hours accordingly. Maximize the savings for time of use. If you have time of use opportunities, some states have AMI data, some don't. Right now, there's a $3 billion out there for matching funds for the Smart Grid Investment Grant programs. Your utilities might be taking advantage of those and updating and being able. Who knows, you might have time of use before you know it. Enable energy efficiency to function as a grid resource. So taking that energy efficiency and being able to use it as a grid resource, if that works for your state. And then in climates and this is one thing that particularly interesting, because some states it's going to be hard to get that energy efficiency savings. Puerto Rico, Hawaii, places where you've got these beautiful, wonderful temperate climates, but energy savings may not. It's hard to get that energy savings because people don't use their heater and air conditioner that much. But you will have but you do have really expensive energy. So being able to apply that towards where the biggest value is for your state. And being able to layer homes and HERA together, because we do want to you can't do it for the same measure. That is unfortunately in the legislation. I say unfortunately, everyone knows I was fighting that up until the last breath, but it's in there. So because it doesn't, because we can't do it for the same measure, then we just need to make sure that can we make the weatherization side optimized and usable from homes when you're also using HERA. Now that's only going to apply to those homeowners who are LMI qualified in HERA, which is 150% of area median income and below. But that is a big population that we do want to help meet their, and I know that state energy offices are very focused on helping meet their energy goals. A couple quick notes on data access. So access to utility data is in the statute. The exact language is that DOE shall develop and publish guidelines for states relating to residential electric and natural gas energy data sharing. DOE guidelines would of course need to come out on that, but there's many state examples that exist today. I know New Hampshire has one, North Carolina. I know there's lots of examples in New York and California. So there's a lot of different opportunities for data sharing that folks might want to be looking at, and I'm sure DOE will be looking at. I think DOE's on the call. I'm pretty sure they are, so I don't want to speak for you, but I would encourage you to look at the states. Multifamily. So last slide on multifamily. Just to note, so multifamily came into this legislation a little bit on the later side. Earlier versions of homes, earlier Congresses did not have multifamily, and then it was included. It's a great opportunity for equity, but it's a little bit more challenging for these approaches. They're originally designed for single family. So if you think they're a little quirky, we got to make a little tweaks. Well, it's probably because we do. So it's $2,000 for the modeled approach is $2,000 per dwelling unit with a max of $2,000 per building. And then for 35%, $4,000 per dwelling unit, max of $4,000 per building, and then 50% of the overall project costs. And all of that can double, at least double, with the cap of 80% of the cost, and that's in modeled. In measured, again, 15% of the portfolio, you set up the 20%, $2,000 for 20%. Again, it's a per dwelling unit that would have to be determined for the state along the same math I had mentioned before, 50% of the project cost. Now, and again, doubles at 80%. A little tweak here, the cap is missing. I'm just noting the cap's missing. It's not in the statute. I know that was an oops. So that might be something that DOE may want to look into, as obviously the cap probably
Kara,
yeah.
it's Jeff. You misstated the model. You said 2,000 and 4,000 for the per building cap. You meant 200,000 and 400,000.
Yes, I'm sorry. And if you don't, it's on the screen. It's 200,000 per building and 400,000 per building. Yes, you're right, Jeff. I'm sorry. I must have misspoke, but it's hopefully people are actually looking at their screen and they saw that. So thanks, Jeff. So yes, but the cap is missing in the measured approach on the statute, and the modeled approach, it's the cap is the 2,000 and the 4,000, 200,000 and the 400,000. Thank you. So with that, I will leave it open to questions, and yes, those caps were much bigger than I'd originally said. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. We did get some questions in the chat, and I'll just encourage folks, if you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat or turn on your video or use the raise your hand feature. So to indicate that you have a question that you want to share vocally. While people are, I don't have a slide for this, Kara, so I apologize for putting you on the spot, but while people are thinking about their questions, would you mind doing like a quick summary of the differences between the measured and the modeled approach?
A quick summary of the differences between the measured and the model?
Just between the two, just to sort of wrap it up.
Oh, should I just share that slide? But
yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll just share my slide one more time. And I'll just go back. You can see my screen now?
Yep.
So there we go. So overall, big picture, the difference between modeled and measured. The modeled is that you have to be the buildings need to be modeled to achieve at least 20%. And here, the real issue here is, one is if you're trying to address one building and provide it per building, you're looking at that home and you want to give them a rebate for the measures they put in that home. That is the modeled approach. And that is 20%. You model it, the model of the house, you calibrate the baseline based on historical energy use, and you do the 20% upgrade. And if they made at least 20%, they get 2,000. If they get at least 35%, they get 4,000. And that's for them. And then that's for the market rate customers, doubled for LMI customers, again, with those caps of 50 and 80%. Measured is really intended to be more along the lines of because it's really hard to get a fractional savings uncertainty for one house. So it's really measured as a portfolio of homes. And it's because it's based on actual energy use. And the intent is just with any aggregation, and the reason for doing an aggregation is that you're going to get some people who are going to overachieve and some people are going to underachieve and some people are going to do exactly what you expected them to do. And as a result, an aggregation should get you to get you a lot closer to what you had planned. But the policymakers are paying only for the actual energy that was saved. So it's not based on a prediction, it's based on actual energy consumption. Does that help, Maddie?
Yeah, thank you. I thought it was a nice summary that I wanted to make sure people had. Okay, so we've got questions in the chat. I'm just going to read them in the order they came in. And in case anyone would like to know, we've got representatives from states, we've got representatives from USD, and we've also got representatives from the private market. So if you feel the need to save questions for later, feel free. Like I said at the top, we are reserving the last half hour of this conversation for a states only discussion. So, but let me dive in. Let's see here. So the first question we had is, what are the envisioned situations for where historical energy data is unavailable or unpredictable, like oil heated homes or locations where estimated meter reads are common?
So that's a really good question. And in the underlying bill, again, I will refer back to 1768, there was a whole section on delivered fuels. And that is something that I think DOE will need to work out. And I'd love to hear from states as to what how they think that could be done and should be done. I think there are ways of doing that for measured and modeled. But it isn't quite as easy as if you just had the utility bills right there. Instead, you have like receipts for fuels and so I think to make it how you would do that, I think there will need to be guidelines specifically on that. The other issue related to if you don't have historical energy use, it depends on where you are. Some places you have historical energy use, even if you're a new homeowner. But that will be a challenge. I think that what if you do not, there's going to have to be some result for that. My concern is that I know I've seen it happen. It actually happened to me where I was ready with all my energy use data, and the contractor that I knew it was part of the program came and said and set everything up, did everything, and I go, oh, you never asked my utility bills, and they said, oh well, that's fine, I just use the average. And that's because, and I know that was an option if they didn't have access to utility bills, but they didn't even ask me. So I don't know how to get past that point of, you just don't want to, because it's easy to say, oh, I'll just use the average. We don't want contractors to just automatically default to that, because so hopefully there's an easy way to get access to utility data, and that's not it's not just the easy button.
And I'll reiterate what Kara said earlier. If any states on the line have preferences for how they would like to handle this program, please let us know.
Yes, please.
And we can put together the details and convey it to DOE what our preferences would be, or feel free to tell DOE directly if you would like to do that. Cool. The next question, I want to pose it for the group, maybe, but Kara, feel free to jump in if you know the answer. Are there any examples of programs using measured savings for whole house type projects?
My understanding is that it is actively being done in California. So, and there may be Carmen Bass from Recurve. I just opened up the chat and I see her. Then she just said there in some places there's pay for performance programs do partial payments up front, which is also great to hear. Carmen, maybe you have an answer to that question.
Yeah, it is an eligible pathway for some programs in California. The market access program allows for whole building interventions that are paid on the measured performance. There's also been a pay for performance residential program that has some, it's not all whole home performance, but it has performance components for specific residential measures, including behavioral interventions as well. So it is out there. I think one of the ways to think of it for historical folks that have been around the industry for a while, it would look a little bit more like you would see in kind of an evaluation report. It's very typical to have measured results in an evaluation of home performance programs. And there's a very wide range of literature on that come in pretty close with the estimates of what those savings would look like for whole home performance.
Thanks. Let's go to the next question that we have. And if any other folks want to answer that question in the chat, please feel free. The next question that we have is, in the event that homes and high efficiency electrification is being used in the same house, how would a measured approach be possible? How could you distinguish between the two? Kara, did you have thoughts on how that might work?
Yeah, so it's relatively simple in the modeled approach, of course, because you're modeling the measure. And then in the measured approach, I think it also can be done. But there would have to be some modeling up front to be able to know. I mean, I think in every case, when a contractor goes into the house, they're going to be making some sort of a prediction because somebody is going to be on the hook for making those payments. So I think that would be understanding that if you put in a brand new heat pump in a house that you're doing the measured approach for, that, and you did the heat pump out of the HERA program, and you're still doing the measured approach, you don't want to take advantage of those pieces from what the heat pump would be. So you'd have to regress those out of that of the program.
So this is Shauna Vasquez speaking. I was the one that pitched this question in the chat, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding. I am no engineer, but I would assume that from a utilities only perspective, if you had a heat pump installed, it would actually look like a utility increase as opposed to a utility decrease, because you're consuming more electricity perhaps than you would have been otherwise, especially if you're in a fuel switching situation where you're switching from like a gas or oil to an electric. And I'm just like, I feel like that overcomplicates the measured approach for homes that want to be able to use both of those funds. And I'm concerned that measured approach would prohibit or discourage people from seeking out funds from both sources because of that issue, where I think it's very important for DOE to follow the language of the legislation to allow both funds to be used in a single household, but perhaps for different energy upgrades. That flexibility is going to be really important when it comes to making sure that we're doing whole home energy improvements as much as possible with these funds. But the measured, it seems, at least in my kind of surface level understanding here, that it would discourage the ability to use both, particularly for those that might be fuel switching when electrifying their homes. So just wanted to flag that, but I appreciate you all explaining that and responding. Thank you.
I think there are challenges, but they have addressed them in there have been examples of some in the programs, and maybe some of the folks who are working in the measured programs can offer that as well in the chat for you, because I do think that there are, I know it's been done and it's being done, but I will say that this is moving something something that has been done in more smaller places into bigger places. But I also want to say there's going to be times when, particularly for income qualified, because HERA is entirely income qualified, when that may be the focus for the income qualified folks, because you can get insulation And they're much more generous credits. And if you're doing, it's up to in the HERA language, but for those measures, they're much more generous. So for those homeowners, they may end up doing those. They may be doing insulation and air sealing and the heat pump in the HERA program. But in homes, you can't do both if you're over 150% of area median income. So there is that, there's a large portion of the population who doesn't even qualify for HERA. So I think that there is a portion of the population that will qualify for both. And in 80% and below in HERA, it's 100% covered. At least it can go up to 100%, whereas in homes, it's only 80%. So there's a lot of reasons that if you're 80% and below area median income, you're just going to do the HERA program. But if you're between 80% and 150, I can see why there might be some overlap, and that's what you're pointing to, and there is going to need to be guidelines on that. Ideas, I would love them.
Okay, thank you so much. Is it Kara or Kara?
Kara.
Kara. All right, thank you, Kara.
Of course.
Great question, Shauna. Thank you. The next one, to the DOE friends that are on the line, this one might be directed at you because you will be the ones drafting the data sharing guidelines. But Kara, again, feel free to answer if you have thoughts. Is data sharing likely to be based on Green Button Connect?
I certainly hope so. The Green Button Connect has been kind of the industry standard, and it's continuing to be updated. And so I hope that they will certainly look to that. I know that both, at a minimum, but then there's other pieces to that. It's like Green Button Connect and so if you look at like the New Hampshire and North Carolina, they both have opportunities that are in there with Green Button Connect as the base that's referenced.
I don't really have anything to add there. I'm sorry that I don't know, is the answer to that one. Haven't really spent any time thinking about it yet. Sorry.
It's okay. Thanks, Joan. And Joan and Adam or anyone from DOE, feel free to jump in if you have answers or thoughts on these questions, but I will just keep going through them. Let's see. So the next question that we have is, I don't know at what point in your presentation this came up, Kara, so we might have to use context clues, but let's see. The question is, are you suggesting that a state could tailor the incentive rate in its plan for homes to offer a higher incentive rate based on time of use or greenhouse gas grid value?
Yes, I am suggesting that, because that is, the law says you can take that into account. So I think that's, and because you're actually measuring kilowatt hours, per kilowatt hour, you can actually assign it to that.
Let me ask a follow-up question, which is, does that incentive rate mean you can go beyond what is in the text of the legislation, the limits that are in the legislation, or are you just calibrating internally who gets more but not exceeding the maximum amounts?
I would be surprised if you could exceed the maximum meaning the 50% and 80%, the overall project. I think that's a pretty solid, but of course I leave that to DOE and their interpretation. But the only way to add additional, to take into account value is to either adjust it from a percentage of, let's say, you either say that if it has additional value, maybe rather than 15%, you're at 14%, 13%, or whether or not it's based on, the per kilowatt hour is just worth a lot more. You get to 15% and your per kilowatt hour is more, but that's how they do it across the country right now, right? That's how time and location and greenhouse gas values are incorporated into kilowatt hours right now in parts of the country. So I would assume that would be the way. Again, these are this is my understanding of congressional intent and my understanding of what's going on at the state level and how I would expect it to happen. And if these are things you like or would like to see or have problems with, please let Maddie and me know, because we'd love to get insights from you and how they're working on the ground and how they could help the states make these programs successful.
Yes. Blanket offer, if you have any needs, desire on any topic, please let us know. The next question is, can you confirm that states will choose between a modeled or measured approach, or might some states have both pathways available?
I would hope either or both. It would be the answer. I know that it says, the statute says, the law says that in the 6 things, you have to say how you're using measured, how you're using model. That's 1 and 2. But, I think it's up to DOE, but I would assume DOE might say how you're using model is you're not doing it, or how you're doing measured is you're not doing it because of whatever reason that you have for addressing the pathway for your state the way you're going to do it. But there's 2 pathways that are offered, and you have to address both in your plan. I don't know if Joan has an answer to that now, but Joan, would you like to answer that now? Is it either or both, or no comment?
I'm sorry, I'm at a meeting and it was hard. I didn't hear that one.
You can say,
Maybe
no
Adam can respond or knows not to respond, or whichever. Adam, were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, I would say we have not determined the
Okay.
question on whether you have to specify if you are planning, what you were planning for modeled and or measured. I would anticipate there will be flexibility, but we cannot promise anything until the guidance is released. So that is all of these pieces, please send your feedback to us or to us via Maddie and Kara, and we will definitely take them into account as we draft the guidance.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. And I'll just add from the NASEO point of view, in the sort of like guiding principles that we are drafting to share with DOE, we've included in there, under the umbrella of program flexibility, that states be available to, that states have the opportunity to run as many variations on this program as they would like. So definitely the NASEO position would be to run variations on both of them, whatever makes sense for your state. But again, we'll see what DOE ultimately decides is allowed. So we've got another question here. A comment that if heating and cooling equipment's not working well, it might artificially be lowering bills. And Carrie, you can add to this if you want, but I can sum up and say that is a good point. And Carrie, do you have any thoughts on it?
If the heating and cooling equipment is not working well, so the bills, well, it also could mean that if your heating and cooling equipment isn't working well, it could be making your bills higher, right? I mean, it works both ways. So it's true, it could be artificial, your bill could be too high because your unit is running really inefficiently, or it's not working well, so you've turned it off. But I actually think that there's a large opportunity that it's actually costing you money that is running inefficiently if it's not working well.
Yeah.
I think both are. The note says actual bills would be low, but a huge comfort loss. How to handle comfort? Comfort is not addressed in comfort and health are 2 things that are not specifically addressed in the legislation. But we all know that there's comfort and health are a huge element to these energy efficiency upgrades and a huge opportunity for benefit. They just aren't mentioned in the law.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Rob.
Go ahead.
If I can just chime in. So what we see sometimes is people literally, the system isn't working well. They can't afford to run the system. It's too expensive. So when you're looking at lower income folks, this is a real situation. So then they have fairly low bills. And if we're going to model against those bills, we're not going to be able to show the savings. So there's, some of these low income folk get stuck in this quandary.
Yeah. Well, there may be, whether or not there's going to be different rules for the low income space is, and Rob, that's another reason why if a low income family is at 80% or below AMI, like I said, they're probably going to be looking at the HERO program, in which case they would then there's no modeling needed. So, and they would also be looking at the weatherization program for their upgrade. So hopefully those families that really can't afford to even run their heating and cooling are being addressed through the Weatherization Assistance Program and the HERO program. That would be my hope.
Next question for you is if there is a sunset on the rebate dollars available to states, and also if you want to answer that sunset generally as well, that would be good.
Yeah, so it goes the whole program goes until 31, and so it's a 9-year program or an 8-year program depending on when we get this all started. The sunset on the rebates dollars being given to the states have 2 years from date of enactment before DOE can choose to reallocate funds to the states that are doing programs, meaning that it was enacted on August 16th and it was signed into by the president. And then, so 2 years from, also August 16th, 2024 would be the earliest that DOE could say, all right, you states who haven't asked for the money, we're going to take the money that's left over from the states who haven't asked for the money to do a program and give it to the states for doing a program. And that's the earliest DOE can do that. Doesn't mean that that's when DOE will do that. And certainly, we're still waiting on, guidelines aren't out yet, but and maybe all states will apply and that won't even be an issue, but that would be so it's up to DOE if they wanted to extend that time. That's the earliest they can reallocate.
Yep. So we have about 4 minutes left for questions. And of course, the ones that are left are not so simple, but hopefully we can get them through them quickly. So we've got a question. Does the measured savings pathway not require building specific baselines? Why the difference from the modeled approach?
Okay, so on that depends, it's going to depend on what the aggregator decides. So it's really more, the measured approach is intended to really allow the market to decide how the measures are going to work. So in order to get that, what is it that's going to take to make that home save energy? That this is where demand response programs could come into play. This is where, different, measures can be, combined. What are the best combinations of measures that aggregator is going to push out there that's going to lead to the best energy savings outcomes? So it's measured is much more market-based when it comes to the measures. Whereas the modeled approach is, there needs to be an established baseline using approved software because you're doing it per house, and it's all based on a model, and so it's an estimate. Whereas in the measured approach, the proof is going to be in the actual energy savings. If there's no energy savings, then the aggregator is on the hook because they promised the energy savings.
Okay. And unfortunately, I'll have to call it with the questions, but I'll give you one last one, which is what happens when a home in the measured approach has less than 15% savings? Is it removed from the portfolio?
If the measured approach has less than 15% energy savings, it removed from the portfolio.
A house that doesn't meet the 15% barrier.
I don't believe so. I mean, I think it's it'll just be up to the aggregator, and there's going to be rules around those portfolios. I mean, Carmen, did you have you turned on your camera. Did you have immediate response to that?
Yeah, I was going to give a similar response in that it would be defined in the program rules, likely, I would expect, because it depends on if the program is settling with the customers and they adopt that as a 15% threshold, or if they adopt it at the portfolio, and then it would be I would recommend doing it at the portfolio level so that you could mitigate the risks of some high savers and some lower savers. So that person who maybe only saved 10% or 14.5% could still get their savings credit, but not be, nixed from a potential payout from an aggregator as well.
So
thank you for jumping in.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you've done that program. You've actually run that program before. These are the things that need to be in the program guidelines. So these are the types of things that we'd love to hear from everyone, particularly but at the state level, if there are certain guidelines that you would like to see or make sure that you have, that's what we definitely want to hear about. I did want to just answer one thing related to, people, it is going to be that aggregators are going to be on the hook for the savings. I saw Frank mention something later on in the chat, and this is something that happens in a number of different programs where people, finance upgrades. So how that is going to work is going to be a determiner that will, is definitely going to be a determiner as to the success of the program. But certain people, it's part of the market approach. Anyway, I'm happy to answer all these questions. Just but I know that we're short on time.
I was going to offer, hopefully it's okay to offer this, that we can review all your questions afterwards and follow up with you that way. Karen, I can divide up the questions and get back to you. Okay, for the last couple of minutes where we've still got everyone on the line, I want to cover a few next steps. So you may recall from Kara's presentation that as part of the application process for DOE, in order for states to get their money, they have to provide a couple of things. If you're going to take a measured savings approach, you'll need to provide to DOE the open source, specifically open source advanced measurement and verification software that you will use to determine and document energy use. And then for the modeled approach, you'll need to submit to DOE your procedures for determining the reduction in energy use that's calibrated to historical energy usage and consistent with BPI 2400. Now, those sort of needs that you will need to supply with DOE in your application will be sort of like our guiding force. I can't think of another phrase other than guiding force for our follow-up conversations on each specific topic. So I will be sending out to everyone who's on the line and also just to all the states and the affiliates who couldn't make the call today, invitations to follow-up meetings, and with the goals in mind of what decisions, what tools, what do we need in order for states to specifically hit the requirements that are asked for them in the legislation. And once, of course, discussions can evolve from there, and I'm sure we'll get into more about the program design elements. But at first, we'll be focused around these specific things that states will need to do in order to get their funds from DOE. So stay tuned for that. The plan at the moment is to have, for both set of calls, assuming that we do divide them between measured and model, we'll provide sort of like a landscape. We'll bring in providers to give them an opportunity to share how that technology works. And of course, discussions on what would be helpful from DOE. What should we ask of DOE? So with that, thank you everybody for joining. If anyone from the affiliates or from DOE side has any last minute questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thank you for being here. If states want to hang out, that would be great. And then we'll get started properly with our states only discussion in about 2 minutes. Thank you again to Kara for presenting today. And hopefully I'll see all of you on Thursday for the conversation on contractor training.
And we'll do this again.